Hello, everyone. Welcome. Um, I am so excited to be here. Uh, Thank you. I want to thank, first and foremost, um, Brian and his team, Alejandra, Jack, for inviting me, hosting me. This week is a very special week for me. I just released my third book yesterday. um, And it's pretty monumental because I never thought that I would be an author of sorts. My background is in human resources management on the professional side. On the academic side, though, it has been history, ethnic studies, African American studies, and really now whiteness studies. So my first book, The 400-Year Holocaust, White America's Legal, Psychopathic, and Sociopathic Black Genocide, and the Revolt Against Critical Race Theory. It was really like writing a cathartic journal of sorts of all of this historical information, all of these historical facts that no one ever told me and that I stumbled upon. And I began to do a legal analysis of every colony and the laws that they implemented to engineer what they began to um, define and describe as whiteness. And finding out that whiteness really is not real, which is one of the first slides I'll begin with, and then discovering that it is rooted in a very distorted perception of oneself and the group because it's a juxtaposition to others that are deemed non-white and what that represented in European culture. That was devastating for me because it then allowed me to understand the intentions of white people toward non-white people, people that they characterize as non-white, as well as just kind of this nature that developed amongst and within the white group itself. And so that was my first book. The second book, I began to say something is deeply psychologically wrong here. And that it took me on a journey to understand both whiteness and also race and racism as psychopathology, as illnesses. And so that's what we're going to deal with tonight. And so this book, The Psychopathy of Whiteness, there's just no shortage of evidence. Turn to the person next to you and say, there's just no shortage of evidence. And so as it kept coming, and with especially the things that are happening right now that are in our midst, people begin to go, oh my goodness, I think you're onto something here. I said, yeah, I've known that for about 10 to 12 years. So it's now been about 15, and I'm going to take you on a journey with me this evening. I want to thank each and every single person who showed up tonight to take this journey, and we're going to establish our own community. How do you like that? Okay. My bad. I have my friend here, Rashad. Okay? Come on. We can give him a hand.
Yeah. No, yeah. So we want to make sure that we welcome Dante King here correctly. You know, I know there's some amazing things and the work that he does. So we just want to make sure we give him the honor. Welcome him to the hey, how we do their show. Okay. All right. So let's start with our grand acknowledgement is going to be read by Isabella, along with the label acknowledgement. So let's start with that. Yeah.
Some powers of enlargement can be occupied in interest of the person with particularly the language. We recognize the principle or has present for this described in the area and as a whole. This markers during the of the southern vision for the In addition, that period of relationship, we can truly foster of inclusive and supportive environment for all indigenous communities. We also acknowledge that the United States is still the stolen labor of the kidnapped African people. Much of it we know of this country today, including its culture, economic growth, and development throughout history and past times, make it made possible for the raise of enslaved Africans and their descendants. Who suffered in Florida, was declared African child slavery, and Jim Crow. We are indebted to their labor and sacrifices and the knowledge of tremendous intelligence that throughout the generations from the resulting impact that can still felt and goodness today. We recognize that these difficult histories persist in present generations realities and privileges of our nation. Here keep coming with this meaningful racism spaces for our work and where we live. We invite you to recognize and really change. Thank you.
Thank you, Isabella. Just to give, Isabella is one of our PhD students. I've had the privilege to work with her and doing some of the things around the college that we're actually in the process of doing a short film that she's put together. And I tell you, the work that she's doing is amazing. So thankful to be part of it. All right, for now, let's talk about Dante King. So first I want to thank Shoreline College, our students, faculty, staff, administration, and members of the board for creating space for conversations like this. Your leadership, presence, and commitment truly matters, especially with the we're honored to be joined by our special keynote speaker, Dante King. Will you got an opportunity to already conversation? Just ready to go, right? Dante King is an author, an educator, a leader, consultant whose work examines the psychological and structural dynamics of power in American institutions, drawing from clinical science, law, political theory, philosophy, social psychology, religion, economics, and media studies. He helps leaders and communities understand how fear, enforcement, and institutional identity shapes policy, culture, and public narratives. Through his books, Diagnosing Whiteness and Anti-Blackness as the Psychopathy of Whiteness, Dante explores patterns that surface during times of crisis, moral disengagement, collective denial, selective empathy, and the tendency to substitute risk management for moral accountability. His work equips participants with practical tools to analyze institutional behavior, interrupt defensive cycles, and build stronger systems rooted in the trust and integrity. Dante's approach blends rigorous truth-telling with civic responsibility. Today, he'll examine ICE in its historical context and guide us in thinking about how we care for ourselves and each other in the face of the violence that we're dealing with today. I want to emphasize that because it is definitely some violence that we're dealing with. Dante King, thank you for your scholarship, your courage, and your commitment to this work. We are grateful to have you with us here today at Shoreline. Welcome.
All right. So you see, I like to talk a lot. I just got started. Anyone who goes on, let's say Amazon or online and purchases the book tonight, I will give you a bookmark. Okay? So, let me share with you just briefly. So some of the black clinical liberation theorists who have inspired my work during this phase consist of Dr. Frantz Fanon, and who was an Afro-French psychiatrist, Dr. E. Franklin Frazier, who wrote a book in the 1950s called The Black Bourgeoisie. So Dr. Fanon's work, his book, The Wretched of the Earth, came after another book that he wrote that was called Black Skin, White Masks. Dr. Frances Cress Welsing, who I'm also going to share a quick snippet, a clip of an interview that she did in the 1970s. But her work around color confrontation theory, it really inspired me to begin to use her framework in psychoanalyzing what I have already evidenced in my research, which is that white people have a compulsive paranoia around genetic annihilation. And it's really driven the collective white mind into this fear, this unrealized fear that black and brown people are somehow going to either take revenge upon them or somehow going to genetically annihilate them. And as I evidenced that throughout the centuries, her work really spoke to me. So I'm going to share a bit about her work. So she was a medical doctor as well as a psychiatrist. Dr. Alvin Toussaint, who was the Dean of Student Affairs at Harvard for a long time, he too was a psychiatrist. He recently passed away. And I was honored to be able to, because I quoted his work in my first book, I was able to get him a copy of my first book, and he reached out and thanked me, and that was just like mind-blowing. I love him. Dr. Bobby Wright, who is a black psychologist, a clinical psychologist, and his work around the psychopathic racial personality. Raise your hand if you've heard of some of these individuals. Okay. And then Dr. Amos Wilson, who was also a black psychologist, and his work in clinical psychology. This book, The Falsification of African Consciousness, Eurocentric History, Psychiatry, and the Politics of White Supremacy, came out in the 1990s, and it's still relevant today. So these perspectives and their frameworks are ingrained in my work. And then Dr. Jerome Fox, his work on the addiction to whiteness, a workbook that I found some years ago, which also discusses some of the prior books that I listed. So, as I mentioned, I've been on this journey for some time now, and I want to begin by just sharing this conceptual framework by Dr. Cress Welsing, who in the 1960s and beyond began to talk about white supremacy as a psychogenetic and social dynamic, and the genetic factor being the color state of whiteness or a lack of an ability to produce high quantities of melanin. And so there is this protective mechanism that has arisen from fear, out of fear. And so she talks about the individual and group psychological response and the development of psychological defense mechanisms being white supremacy. So white supremacy is a compensatory logic system. In the video that you're about to see, she goes into some detail about this. And she says the practices of the psychological defense mechanism shows up in every area of what she refers to as people activity, and that being economics, education, entertainment, labor, law, politics, religion, sex, and war. And I want to just say, what you'll see here tonight is like a strand of hair in the totality of courses that I teach and slides that I have. I have over about 7,000 slides. So, white supremacy, behavioral system, it's a worldwide behavioral system. Okay, here we go.
Dr. Frances Welsing, a well-known psychiatrist whose psychiatric theories and views on a number of topical issues have had a significant impact on Afro-Americans. She is the author of The Crest Theory of Color Confrontation. And Melvin Van Peebles, director and producer of various stage plays and movies. He is the author of a newly published book entitled The True American. Our first guest is Dr. Francis Welsing. Joining me in the questioning is Richard Prince from the Washington Post. Mr. Prince has the first question.
Yes, Dr. Welsing, it's been about a year ago since you were dismissed from Howard University, and at the time I recall you charged that your Crest Theory, which in brief holds that whites are inferior to blacks because of the lack of melanin, was responsible for that dismissal. And I'm wondering whether you still believe that and what proof you have of that.
Well, Dick, I do believe it. I was dismissed from Howard, fired from Howard in June 1975. In November 1974, while still at Howard, I heard a rumor that I was going to be blocked from promotion and tenure because of my views, not because of my academic work. And I went immediately to the Dean of the College of Medicine, Dr. Marion Mann, and I asked him, I said, Dr. Mann, I hear that I am going to be blocked from promotion and tenure because of my views. And Dr. Mann responded, to be frank with you, Dr. Welsing, this paper that you wrote, and I said, The Crest Theory of Color Confrontation, he said yes. He went on to say that it did not make sense for me to say that white people were envious of black people because white people lack skin pigmentation. And we went on from that point. But let me make one correction. My theory does not say that whites are inferior to blacks. I don't say that. I say that whites feel that they are inferior because they cannot produce skin pigmentation and because their status as, I say, a variant of albinism is genetic recessive to blacks, and they can be genetically annihilated by non-white people, that this is what causes that sense of inadequacy, that they have built a total behavioral system that is a compensation. White supremacy is a compensation for a sense of white genetic inadequacy.
I see. One other follow-up on that, and that is what background in genetics do you have to enable you to document that theory?
Well, I'm a medical doctor, and all medical doctors receive or take courses in genetics. And this is very, very basic genetics. And it not only is very basic genetics, this is common lay knowledge. And we hear it, the dominance, the genetic dominance of black over white is heard in the expression, one drop of black blood makes you black. In other words, if you were to relate to a white female, the product of that relationship would be an individual that is identifiable as what is called non-white. They would have something, I mean, the curliness of the hair, the darkness of the skin would make the child look more like you than like the mother.
I see.
Dr. Welsing, your theory to me seems to infer some innate behavior on the part of a human being because they are, quote, black or white. Would you agree or disagree that the terms black and white are not genetic definitions? And if they are not genetic definitions, then how could your theory be true?
Well, wait a minute. When you say genetic definitions, I'm not quite sure what you say, but for the sake of time, the factors that determine whether we're going to have skin pigmentation or whether we lack skin pigmentation is based on genes. In other words, you have genes that determine the quantity of melanin pigment that is going to be produced in your skin, in your eyes, in your hair. If you have a gene, a mutation towards an inability to produce that pigment, that is also genetically determined. And that is at least within the context of the Western world or the white supremacy culture. The dominant classification of people, not as determined by Francis Welsing, but as determined by white people themselves, is your classification. Either you are white or you are classified as non-white. This is on your birth certificate. This is on every paper of identification that you have. And this focus on skin coloration, I maintain, is based on the awareness on the people who are now in power that they are a minority. The white group represents a minority in the world population. And the color focus is something that is a psychological, I say a psychological necessity based on a genetic reality. So I don't know if this gets to your question now, any other thing that one might say that results from the absence of pigment, I mean, that's another discussion. I don't know whether you want to go into
Well,
that.
following that logic, then, would it not be accurate to say that there would be a difference psychologically in light-skinned blacks from dark-skinned blacks?
Well, psychologically, yes, and I think that we are all aware of that. Under white supremacy, the conditioning has been the closer you are to white, the more acceptable you are. So that, for example, all of us learned as we were growing up in the black community, if you are black, stay back. If you are brown, stick around. If you are yellow, you're mellow, and if you're white, you're right. And the appreciation of an individual, even within the black group itself, was very often based on the relative absence of skin pigmentation. And even within families, children thought that they were ugly if they were darker. And families, parents have said that to children. Even now, people want to know when a baby is just born in the hospital, some of the first questions that are asked by the black parents about the child or the black family members, is it light skin and does it have straight hair? To know how much value we're going to put on this new baby. Because within the framework of the culture in which we live, the closer you are to white, the more you're considered beautiful, and perhaps under some circumstances, the more opportunities you will have.
All right. So what I'd like you to do, because that was a lot to take in, is just share briefly with the person next to you or on the same row, what are your thoughts about what she said? What's your interpretation first, and how do you feel about it? Okay? So I'll give you about 90 seconds, 45 seconds each. All right, if you hear my voice, clap once. If you hear my voice, clap twice. If you hear my voice, clap 3 times. Okay, let's hear from one person in the audience who'd like to share their interpretation and their thoughts about what you heard from Dr. Welsing. Any takers? Do I have to call on someone? We're all adults here. Who looks? I see somebody. I looked at people in the eye. They avoided eye contact immediately.
You said just to say.
Your thoughts, interpretation.
Yeah. So 90% of what she said in her responses was not new to me. The part that was new to me was the underpinning etiology of the genetic deficit in melanin that causes this compensatory issue.
Mm-hmm.
That was a striking theory. I've never heard that before.
Yeah, and I'll tell you, when I found it, I was like, oh, because her book, The ISIS Papers, is the first collection of papers that she writes or introduces, and I'm like, oh my goodness, I've evidenced what she's saying. I actually have proof to prove this. So if we go further, she says, white supremacy is a power system dynamic structured and maintained by persons who classify themselves as white, whether consciously or subconsciously determined. It consists of patterns of perception, logic, symbol formation, thoughts, speech, actions, and emotional response infused simultaneously into all areas of people activity, including economics, education, entertainment, labor law, politics, religion, sex, and war. White supremacy's ultimate purpose is to ensure white genetic survival and prevent white genetic annihilation on planet Earth. And so, in Theodore Allen's book, The Invention of the White Race, he says the white race was not a natural or biological category. It was a ruling class social control formation deliberately constructed in the late 17th century, colonial Virginia. And so you have various groups that are migrating here. Nancy Eisenberg's book, White Trash, The 400-Year Untold History of Class in America, she talks about how they sent their surplus people here, people that they considered waste people, who were really, vagabonds or people of the lowest stature that had, or were considered to have no value or worth in England. And so what I want to talk about today are the ways that, based on what Dr. Welsing is describing in her work, we exist, and our foundation, the foundation of our country, all exist upon white ideas and ideals. And so if you start with the premise that whiteness is made up and it is a social construct, and yet people have attached their identity and humanity to this color concept and developed an entire psychological and behavioral system, then you can further understand that we exist within a state of delusion, and that everything that we think that defines us as a race of people, as a culture, as a country, has been built on delusions and hallucinations. And so cognitive distortion is a pattern of inaccurate, exaggerated, or irrational thinking that influences how a person perceives themselves, others, and the world around them. These thought patterns are typically automatic and feel true, even when they don't reflect reality. And so I want to play another quick clip, and this is Donald Trump's first speech where he introduces his first campaign.
Our country is in serious trouble. We don't have victories anymore. We used to have victories, but we don't have them. When was the last time anybody saw us beating, let's say, China in a trade deal? They kill us. I beat China all the time. All the time. When did we beat Japan at anything? They send their cars over by the millions. And what do? When was the last time you saw a Chevrolet in Tokyo? It doesn't exist, folks. They beat us all the time. When do we beat Mexico at the border? They're laughing at us, at our stupidity. And now they're beating us economically. They are not our friend, believe me.
So notice, with every region around the world that he named, he did not name one European place. It was all projected. And how many of you can see and sense and feel kind of the anger around it? Okay.
But they're killing us economically. The U.S. has become a dumping ground for everybody else's problems. Thank you. It's true. And these are the best and the finest. When Mexico sends its people, they're not sending their best. They're not sending you. They're not sending you. They're sending people that have lots of problems, and they're bringing those problems with us. They're bringing drugs, they're bringing crime, they're rapists, and some, I assume, are good people. But
Okay, so turn to your neighbor and say, cognitive distortion. Well, because it's rooted in false perceptions. Everything he said is how, through grievance and how he understands the world, it's not rooted in fact. Okay? So, America has always been a fascist country concerning black and indigenous people. All right? Going back to Dr. Cress Welsing's work, and this is one initial example. This is Virginia, 1664. It says, "Be it enacted by the right honorable the Lord Proprietary by the advice and consent of the upper and lower house of this present General Assembly, that all Negroes or other slaves within the province and all Negroes and other slaves to be hereafter imported into the province shall serve hard labor for life." And so the process of stripping black men of all of their value in a capitalistic system and making them a free labor force places them in a socioeconomic status of forever economic deprivation. How many of you get that? Okay, the other piece of this deals with, so, "And all children born of any Negro or other slave shall be slaves as their fathers were." You've got to make the black male, the collective black male body politic, valueless in every way so that they're unattractive for the term of their life. And for as much as diverse freeborn English women, forgetful of their free condition and to the disgrace of our nation, marry black men, by which also diverse suits may arise. They're concerned about diverse suits, okay? Touching the issue of such women, and a great damage befalls the master of such Negroes, for prevention whereof, for the future, for deterring such freeborn women from such shameful matches, be it further enacted by the authority, advice, and consent, aforesaid, that whatsoever freeborn woman shall marry any slave from and after the last day of this present assembly shall serve the master of such slave during the life of her husband. Okay? And so they're concerned with a few things here. One, that they do not want white women amalgamating with black men, and particularly English women were born with the status of free because their status followed that of their paternal parent. And English people and Christian freeborn people were considered free, okay? And so you lose that status as free if you marry a black man, and that's the penalty. How many of you can see that the object of this law is concerned with keeping keeping white women away from black men? And it's due to this idea, because they begin to see through the marriages of men of African descent who are marrying English and other freeborn women during this period, that the babies are not coming out white. How many of you get that? Okay. Let me just see. So turn to your neighbor and say paranoia. All right. They also know, and I didn't include the Casual Killing Act here, but by this time it's legal to just murder black people with impunity. What they say in the Casual Killing Act is because black people are not taking the terrorism that we're inflicting upon them lying down, and they happen to be stubborn. This is the white psychological interpretation, because black people are stubborn, and you can't control them than anything other than violent means. You can murder them with impunity. That's the Casual Killing Act of 1669. And so how many of you understand that that inspires paranoia when you know that you are defiling people, you're terrorizing them? You begin to unravel psycho-spiritually and psycho-emotionally. And so I go to this law just 3 years later, same colony. For as much as it hath been manifested to this grand assembly that many Negroes, that many black men have lately been and now are out in rebellion in sundry parts of this country, and that no means have yet been found for the apprehension and suppression of them, from whom many mischiefs of very dangerous consequence may arise. What does that language constitute? Nothing's happening. But it's a projection, and oh my God, something might happen, and we've got to pass this law. Schizophrenia, collective schizophrenia. And I think it's very important to use this diagnostic language so that we can really see what has happened instead of looking at history as just a set of historical facts or occurrences. There is a lot of pathology here. It's mental illness. And so because it may arise to the country, if either other Negroes, Indians, or servants should happen to fly forth and join with them, for the prevention of which, be it enacted by the governor, council, and burgesses of this grand assembly, and by the authority thereof, that if any Negro, mulatto, Indian slave, or servant for life run away and shall be pursued by the warrant or hue and cry, it shall and may be lawful for any person who shall endeavor to take them upon the resistance of such Negro, mulatto, Indian slave, or servant for life to kill or wound him, or them so resisting. So I want you to ask your neighbor, what happens to a group of people? I want you to ask your neighbor, what happens to a group of people who continue to reinforce the treachery, violence, and murder and perpetual targeting of this other group called black people? What do you think happened psychologically over 400 plus years? Now I want you to answer it. I'll give you 30 seconds each. All right. How many of you think you're coming up with an answer? You're starting to do the math. How many of you are starting to do the math? By show of hands. Okay. So let's go to the Act Preventing Negro Insurrections. This is 1680. Whereas, let's psychoanalyze this together. Whereas the frequent meeting of considerable numbers of Negro slaves under pretense of feasts and burials, so breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and going to funerals, is judged of dangerous consequence. So we're concerned with too many of them gathering in one place at one time, and we're judging a dangerous consequence. For prevention whereof for the future, be it enacted by the King's most excellent majesty, by and with the consent of the General Assembly, and it is hereby enacted by the authority aforesaid, that from and after the publication of this law, it shall not be lawful for any Negro, and I want you to catch this. How many of you see that this is not just the legislature or, people that are on the way to becoming white being concerned with enslaved people? This is about anti-blackness. Every action is naming not just the enslaved class. It's a training. This legal process, it is psycho-legal, it's psycho-educational, and it is programming the entire society, even black men and black women who are put in charge sometimes as overseers to beat each other, to whip each other. And this is all an extension of Eurocentric violence, Eurocentric violent behavior. This is not the engineering of African people on the North American continent. Okay. So, and it is hereby enacted by the authority aforesaid that from and after the publication of this law, it shall not be lawful for any Negro or other slave to carry or arm himself with any club, staff, gun, sword, or any other weapon of defense or offense, nor to go or depart from his master's ground without a certificate from his master, mistress, or overseer, and such permission not to be granted but upon particular and necessary occasions, and every Negro or slave so offending, not having a certificate as aforesaid, shall be sent to the next constable, who is hereby enjoined and required to give the said Negro 20 lashes on his bare back well laid on, and so sent home to his said master, mistress, or overseer. I'd like everyone in this room who can to stand really quickly. And I want you to turn to the person next to you or behind you and just extend your arms like this. Imagine what it's like to have to defend your presence and existence in any space and any time to someone else, in any person of the group in power that asks you to do it. Now think about the person that's requiring you to do it and why, psychologically and psychospiritually. Total fear. But the fear is rooted in a psychological distortion and a projection based on the fear that they're projecting onto you, that they're committing onto you, all of these violences, but then they project that you're the dangerous one. Have a brief conversation about that. What are your thoughts? You can drop your arms. What are your thoughts? All right, if you hear my voice, clap once. If you hear my voice, clap twice. If you hear my voice, clap 3 times. Okay, I'm going to go on. This next part is so relevant to our psychosocial dynamics today. And it is further enacted by the authority aforesaid that if any Negro or other slave, and I want to contextualize other slave right now to mean any other non-European person in this moment. If any Negro or other slave shall presume or lift up his hand in opposition against any Christian, shall for every such offense, upon due proof made thereof by the oath of the party before a magistrate, have and receive 30 lashes on his bare back well laid on. So it doesn't even have to be true. Dante's tone, I thought he was going to do something to me. He flinched. And so what you have always is white people's interpretations and their suspicions embedded into the law. It's the enforcement mechanism. And that's true within the context of employment. Several of you can decide that I am not competent in my job in terms of measuring up to white ideas and ideals, and you can have me fired. I violated white sociocultural standards, psychosocial standards of professionalism based on white people's interpretations. That's the lash. And all of a sudden, my reputation is destroyed. I and my family are economically deprived. Because when we are in the rooms with you, your voices matter most. And they are aligned with the institution. Remember Dr. Welsing's definition, language, logic, symbol formation. It's all in your hands. So when we come into rooms and you all play this idea up that we're all equal, we all have the same academic qualifications, it's not true. Turn to your neighbor and say it's not true. So there's no considerations many times for the positional status of whiteness in institutions and in rooms. Okay? Last part of this. And it is hereby further enacted by the authority aforesaid that if any Negro or other slave shall absent himself. So if you run away, if you try to get away from the terrorism, and lie hid and lurking in obscure places, committing injuries to the inhabitants because you're trying to defend yourself from being accosted and killed and recovered, whatever they're calling it, and shall resist any person or persons that shall by any lawful authority be employed to apprehend and take the said Negro, that then in case of such resistance, it shall be lawful for such person or persons to kill the said Negro or slave so lying out and resisting, and that this law be once every 6 months published at the respective county courts and parish churches within this colony. So when you're going to church, you're being educated. We have a law that says black people can't defend themselves against you. Even if you interpret that they might inflict some type of harm against you, you can have them subjected to 30 lashes. If they don't show you their certificate and they don't defend and verify their existence in any space, you can have them subjected to 20 lashes. Oh, and by the way, if they don't come along with you when you're trying to recover them, even if they may not be an enslaved person, we're just talking about Negroes or enslaved people, you have the right to kill them. You have the right to kill them. So we're going to stand up and have communion, and we're going to pray and hear the choir. Turn to your neighbor and say psychosis. How many of you are understanding what I'm trying to lay out here by show of hands? Okay. Yes. Can you give me 1 sec? Yeah, can you just give me 1 second? Okay. And so white paranoia, a chronic delusional fear disorder defined by the conviction that black and other non-white people seek revenge for historical and ongoing atrocities. It is the perception of guilt into fear, an inversion in which the aggressor imagines themselves the potential victim. A chronic delusional fear disorder defined by the conviction that black and, okay, got it. This paranoia ensures the continuity of racial hierarchy by transforming accountability into threat. It is the psychic panic of exposure, the terror that the mirror of justice might reveal what the white ego cannot bear to see itself. All right, question.
So I have a family member who has a mental illness and who went through a very traumatic psychotic episode for all of us in the family. And I've been challenged with few ideas in your presentation when it comes to associating serious medical conditions to behaviors of white people that are, behaviors is very light word, to century of white people's violence, very intentional violence over black people and other people of color. And so it is very challenging to me to associate serious medical conditions with that behavior for which I have no empathy, whereas on the other side, I have so very much empathy for my family member or for any other people that has a serious mental health issues over which they don't have control, they are not intentional about. So I would like to understand how we can understand your presentation while not at the same time banalizing medical conditions of people who are really, really struggling with those.
Okay, thank you so much. So I would say to that, one, please engage the literatures of the people that I introduced at the beginning of the session so that you can understand their relationship to characterizing whiteness through these concepts and through these frameworks. That's one. Two, it sounds like you have a relationship with the mental health field where you recognize that people that are struggling with certain, mental conditions as a result of trauma that has been inflicted upon them, that's one relationship. That's a separate relationship. What I am doing in my work is I'm not saying we need to feel empathy here. This is not a defense at all whatsoever. This is an explanation of total madness in psychopathy. In psychopathy, things like psychopathy, sociopathy, those are not seen as just kind of the run-of-the-mill mental illnesses, such as maybe bipolar disorder or, schizophrenia. It's different. So, and we can talk on the side too, but in order to understand these black clinical liberation theorists and what they were trying to do, they were trying to really vindicate black people and say what you are dealing with and what you have been immersed in throughout all of this time, you are not the problem. You have been surrounded by people who have waged psycho-spiritual and physical warfare, psycho-emotional warfare against you. And you are continuously pathologized through Eurocentricity when you're not the issue. And they really are the issue. And so this is to bring validation and an explanation to black people, people of African descent, and non-white people. Does that make sense? Okay. And I offer a 16-week fellowship if anyone is interested, which I co-facilitate with Dr. Robin DeAngelo. We'll be launching another one, I think, in September. For anyone who's interested, please go to my website. It's danteking.com. But it's also, some of it, and so much of it is an indictment in terms of, it's an indictment of whiteness and an indictment of white people who choose to remain ignorant and who don't want to go out and learn when there are countless resources out here where white people can discover their own history and things that they need to know about themselves, right? This is not about becoming the victim. If you are a European person, or my family didn't do it, I didn't do it. The fact of the matter is you identify with something that developed as the umbrella for groups like the KKK, the Nazi Party, Anglo supremacy. You belong to that group. And so I'm going to ask you, how many of you would go and join a group right now today and not do research about the group? You would just unwillfully join it. How many of you would do that? By show of hands. No one. We wouldn't. We'd be looking it up. Have they committed violences? Have they gone out and burned down people's homes? Right. So to white people, go and learn about yourselves. Learn why you have these psychological impulses to respond or to be in control or to react or to lack humility, the lack of empathy. And I'm going to get to that too, because I included in this book a conceptual framework around that as well. So I talked about this in Nancy Eisenberg's book. She talks about how the British colonists exported England's poor and criminal underclass to America. Early settlement in Jamestown was seen as a way to rid England of its rubbish population. Okay? And so you see this group, the very fluidity of whiteness over time. For instance, Germans were not considered white at one point. And you have, for example, Winthrop Jordan in his book White Over Black documenting this. He says, the Germans flocked especially to Pennsylvania, this is in the 18th century, where by mid-century they constituted a third of the population. Though most were Protestant, their presence aroused some antagonism for their large numbers and tenacious devotion to their language and ways suggested to some colonists that Pennsylvania might be becoming New Germany. In a famous outburst, Benjamin Franklin asked petulantly, why should the Palatine Boers be suffered to swarm into our settlements, and by herding together establish their language and manners to the exclusion of ours? Why should Pennsylvania, founded by the English, become a colony of aliens who will shortly be so numerous as to Germanize us instead of our Anglifying them, and will never adopt our language or customs any more than they can acquire our complexion? So how many of you see this, that over time, certain groups, as they, you know, are able to fit in, they can become a part of the conglomerate? All right. And how many of you see the concern with complexion? Okay. So hyperparanoia. Turn to your neighbor and say hyperparanoia. Turn to your other neighbor and say fixation. Turn to the person behind you and say compulsive. Okay. So I begin to deal with, wow, white people are really obsessed with this idea of race and racism in this kind of color framework. And you see it. So this is one of the first times, if not the first, where the language white shows up in colonial law. And this is in Maryland. And it has to do with an Irish woman by the name of Eleanor Butler, who persuaded her then boss at the time, the Lord Governor of Maryland, to marry a black man. And so he was against it initially, and then he finally gave in. So she was able to marry this black man August 1681. By September, they're passing this law. For as much as diverse freeborn English or white women, sometimes by the instigation, procurement, or connivance of their masters, mistresses, or dames, and always to the satisfaction of their lascivious and lustful desires, and to the disgrace not only of the English, but also of many other Christian nations, do intermarry with Negroes and slaves, by which means diverse inconveniences, controversies, and suits may arise, touching the issue of or children of such freeborn women as aforesaid, for prevention whereof for the future, be it enacted that if the marriage of such woman servant with any slave shall take place by the procurement or permission of the master, such woman and her issue, her child, shall be free, and enacts a penalty by fine on the master or mistress and on the person joining the parties in marriage. So we have to make sure that we are not producing non-white babies, people. You've got to get it. Turn to your neighbor and say, you better get this. Okay? There is such a rampant concern here. How many of you can see it and feel it? And so what they do is they start to criminalize the ministers. They start to find the plantation owners, because that earlier law gave them more labor for their plantations. And so you had, planters who were encouraging mixed race marriages and the reproduction of mixed race children. The legislature says, we don't want that. We cannot have that. We are trying to engineer a nation based on colorism, and you all are going against the grain. And so we need to enact. How many of you know economic penalties speak? They hold weight. They hold weight. Come on. You know they hold weight. That's why they start special ed programs at schools and funnel black and brown children into those programs, and the government funds those seats. They give them extra money for those special ed programs, right? The more that we can misdiagnose black and brown children with autism and ADHD and we can misprescribe, more economic benefit. And so the engine of white supremacy is anti-blackness. But again, the hyperparanoia around color and complexion. And you see it. Thank you so much. Okay. I think. Thank you so much. Okay. Yeah, maybe. Don't worry about it. All right. So I'll come back to this. But this is what I talk about as the psychocognitive defense mechanisms of whiteness. And I want to just share this here. If there are any white people in the audience who are beginning to feel somewhat defensive or maybe deflect into other things, or maybe it was about class, or, or you're dissociating, stop. Okay? Stop. You'll be just fine. Okay? But that's also true for others in the room too. And I want to say specifically to black people, how many of you are sitting here and going, wow, this is painful? Because some of this I may have heard before, but I've never heard it framed in this way by show of hands. So I want us to be sensitive to it. Look at all the hands that are going up. Keep your hands up. I really want us to be sensitive to the black and brown people because we're living this today. So I'm going to play a short clip from this documentary, Slave Catchers, Slave Resistors. And I want you to just pay attention, just catch two key things from this clip. It'll be about less than 3 minutes.
It is the late 1600s on a small plantation near Charleston, South Carolina, that Arthur Middleton has inherited. Middleton quickly doubles his land, making him one of the colony's wealthiest businessmen. Enslaved Africans teach him how to cultivate rice and provide free labor, enabling Middleton to extract enormous riches from the swampy wilds of South Carolina.
When some people talk about the creation of plantation society, I think about the creation of slave labor camps. That's what these are. The people are enslaved, they're laboring, and they're in a camp. If you could cope with the moral obscenity of it, you could become extremely rich. And that sort of bargain with the devil was one that was made very early by these southern would-be planters.
As soon as enslaved Africans were brought to colonial America, they resisted, they fought back, and they ran away.
Would they go willingly into a situation of perpetual racial servitude? No way.
What you have here often is this conflict between humanity and inhumanity, between those who would deny human recognition to a human being and those who would assert that human recognition under the most drastic, the most dangerous of circumstances.
Parents try to be reunited with children. Children struggle to be reunited with parents by running away, but not necessarily running towards freedom in the abstract, but by running towards family members that for them represent safety and security.
To stem the financial loss of slaves who escape, for whatever reason, South Carolina begins to experiment with different ways for catching them. At first, neighbors are asked to volunteer. Rewards are given to those who capture runaways. When this fails, the legislature passes a law in 1690 that mandates all whites to serve as slave hunters, requiring the entire white population of South Carolina to be a racial police force. Those who refuse to serve are fined. In cities like Charleston, night watchmen are paid to keep an eye out for slaves who violate curfew. They even try using their militia. Then, in 1704, the colony tries something new. They begin to experiment with small makeshift groups of citizen police called patrols. If the colony's system for catching slaves is inconsistent and uncertain, the punishments aren't. Runaways who are caught are brutally whipped. Their noses sometimes slit.
They were branded with hot branding iron on various parts of their bodies, sometimes on the shoulders, sometimes on the back, sometimes on the cheek, sometimes on the forehead. They were branded with the letters of the owners. They were branded with R for runaway.
In 1722, South Carolina, with the consent of some leaders of the Baptist Church, passes a law requiring all male runaways to be castrated.
You have to make it very clear that I own you and I own you for life and I'm going to own your children and your children's children. And the repercussions of running away or resisting is physical. It's much more brutal than we understand.
In areas where slaves greatly outnumber whites, punishments are particularly brutal. These ad hoc methods of control manage to prevent large numbers of slaves from escaping. However, the colony is changing.
All right. I want to invite you to stand, and I want you, for those who can, to go and meet up with someone in the room and just share what's one takeaway that you caught from that clip. There were many. There are at least three, but share one. Okay? All right, if you hear my voice, go ahead and raise your right hand. If you hear my voice, raise your right hand. Just kind of wave it around like this. Okay. Let's hear from a few people. Who'd like to share one takeaway? Okay. Oh.
Immediately made me think about DHS, ICE, MAGA, funded, a president that's saying it's okay, and our neighbors are being, in my community, Latinx people are being chased, and it's okay.
Declaring war.
Right.
Yeah, for sure.
Race-based war.
It's a target on the other. Race-based war. Yes.
Funded.
How many of you can see that, the parallels? That's actually where I was going. You jumped ahead of me. But no, because it's happened so many times throughout this country's history. It's a playbook. It's a playbook. How many of you caught, let's hear from one other person. What was the takeaway? This gentleman over here in the back.
I went over to the fine video producer, Rob, and we talked about it for a bit. He mentioned something that I kind of missed myself. Apparently, what is it? There was a cult, like, what is that? Not even what I'm trying to say. They kind of encouraged everybody to get involved on the slave catching, and it kind of created like a culture of, you know, like
terrorism.
Unity? Terrorism, but like a unity between them to like terrorize it, kind of like the KKK in a sense. Like,
that's right. And so you got the language, got them all involved. I want to clarify, legalized, white people, every white person in this room, stand up. You now are required by law to assert yourselves over black people and to go out and hunt them for your benefit, your psychological, psycho-spiritual benefit, and for your economic benefit. You're required. How does that make you feel? You'll be fined if you don't. So your lives are committed to this. And so what I begin to think, or you can have a seat, what I also begin to realize psychologically and psychospiritually, that not only is the empathy being trained out of white people, there is a psycho, an emotional detachment that is happening, but there's also malice an evil being trained in that leads to a compulsive behavior that extends itself into today's America. And there are different levels. There are more extreme iterations of it. There are less extreme iterations of it. But I know for myself as a black person, it makes it hard and really impossible for me to trust any white person because I don't know when that switch is going to turn on or off. And it's turned on for me too many times throughout my life. How many of you can identify with that? Okay. So, 1705, an act concerning servants and slaves. And for a further Christian care and usage of all Christian servants, be it also enacted by the authority aforesaid, and it is hereby enacted that no Negroes, mulattoes, or Indians, although Christians or Jews, and they're talking about Afro-Jews in this context, Moors, Mohammedans, or other infidels, shall at any time purchase any Christian servant, nor any other, except of their own complexion. So people who are seen as brown Indians, you can purchase brown Indians and maybe mulatto, mestizo people, some Negroes. If you are black, a black planter, no matter how economically astute you are, you can only own enslaved, you can only have either black servants or enslaved black people working on your plantation. And if you are white or considered white, you can own everyone. So how many of you see within the framing and the usage of the language complexion, again, there is a hyper-vigilance and a hyper-focus on color cast. By show of hands. Okay. And it's coming from the white race. This is not black people playing the race card. This is white people dealing all the cards. Psychologically, psychospiritually obsessed. Turn to your neighbor and say, it's an obsession. Turn to your other neighbor and say, addiction. And if any Negro, mulatto, or Indian, Jew, Moor, Mohammedan, or other infidel, or such as are declared slaves by this act, shall notwithstanding purchase any Christian white servant, the said servant shall ipso facto become free and acquit from any service then due. It doesn't matter how economically stable or affluent that black planter may be. We don't want white people working for black people. You are not. Even if you are illiterate, you are poor, you are by white socioeconomic and white cultural standards, the lowest of the low. You are better than every Negro you may come upon. We don't want you on their plantations. And we're going to make it abundantly clear to white men and white women who may have white Christian servants working for them on their plantations. And if any person, if any white planter, be it male or female, having such Christian servant shall intermarry with such Negro, mulatto, or Indian, Jew, Moor, Mohammedan, or other infidel, every Christian white servant of every such person so intermarrying shall ipso facto become free and acquit from any service then due to such master or mistress so intermarrying as aforesaid. So white men, if you marry an Indian woman, we're going to make sure that that white servant becomes free. If you marry a black woman, that white servant becomes free. You lose your economic investment. You lose your labor force. How many of you are seeing how this is being enforced and designed? It is shaping the design of American culture by show of hands. It's so methodical. It's diabolical. Turn to your neighbor and say it's diabolical. This is the Negro Act of 1740, South Carolina. Section 1 declares all Negroes and Indians to be slaves. Section 2, under this provision, it has been uniformly held that color is prima facie evidence that the party bearing the color of a Negro, mulatto, or mestizo is a slave. But the same prima facie result does not follow from the Indian color. So if you are of the Indian color based on the white legislatures or legal officials' perception, you're free. if you are someone who is black, they're saying on its face, if we think you're black, or you have one drop of black blood in you, you are to be enslaved. Any white person can come upon you. I own you. Because we're outlawing free black people to exist within this colony. And so there is a fixation on people with African ancestry that is very different than any other group that resides in this country. And it's not even the realness or the realization of blackness, because what I also found is that when white people believed, they thought that people who actually possessed African ancestry could pass for white, even if they had African ancestry, but they thought they were white, they were fine. The moment they found out they were black, they begin to unravel. And I said, whoa, this is deep in the psychology. And so Dr. Bobby Wright, in his work around the psychopathic racial personality, he says it is neurobiological. It's hardwired in. Love to hear from some white people. If you'd like to respond, what are you thinking? What are your thoughts? Who'd like to share? Don't be scared. Oh.
Well, my husband and I spent 15 years living in South Carolina, and to say they're in the 1800s is being kind. It's tragic. It's just really tragic to have us all put into law and have the law wrapped around how it was going to work to the benefit of the white people and to the total disadvantage of people of color. I mean, it's so baked in we didn't realize it until fairly recently.
In states like Washington and Oregon, when they begin to form, they begin to write into their constitution that black people could only come into the state for a period of time, but that they had to go. So it's not just the South, it's not just South Carolina. Yes, the colonies sets the foundation for what becomes the United States, but this spreads, people. You've got, white immigrants that come into this country, as well as people from the South who begin to migrate west. And they carry this belief system, these ideologies. So how many of you understand it as a psychosocial and a total behavioral system that has been developed over time?
Intentional.
Yes.
Intentional.
Yes. Thank you. Would you like to say something? No? Okay. So anti-blackness, as I talk about in my book, Diagnosing Whiteness and Anti-Blackness. So if you haven't gotten that book, that's my second book, okay? It is a European, white American legal, social, cultural, economic, institutional values and belief system. A cultural belief system that involves the deprioritization of humans labeled as black people, as well as the criminalization, hyper-negativity, hyper-scrutiny, and negative positioning of black people and or blackness throughout all aspects of American society and life for the purposes. It serves a purpose. Turn to your neighbor and say it serves a purpose. So for the purposes of justifying and rationalizing political, social, cultural, economic debasement and inhumane treatment, ultimately genocide. And so anti-blackness encompasses and can target groups with African ancestry, including African Americans, who it's most aimed at, Afro-Indigenous people, including certain Latinx groups, Afro-Latinx groups such as Panamanians, Hondurans, Mexicans, Cubans, Afro-Asians, Afro-Jewish people within the racialized scope. So whenever we're talking about racism, we need to racialize everything. So when people say, oh, well, what about Latinos? Are we talking about European Latinos? Are we talking about Afro-Latinos? Because those experiences are very different. And there's a book that I want to give. There are a few books that I mentioned in my work. One by Dr. Claire Jean Kim, Asian Americans in an Anti-Black World, where she talks about racial triangulation and how Asian Americans are set up to serve white supremacy, just like African Americans are, but they also benefit from anti-blackness. And there's tremendous anti-blackness that has been embedded throughout the diaspora. How many Asian Americans or Asian people in the room are willing to admit to what I'm saying by show of hands? Okay. There's another book by Tanya Katari Hernandez, who is a law professor, and it's called Racial Innocence, Unmasking Latino Anti-Black Bias. And she's an Afro-Latina, and she talks about how deeply embedded it has been there. How many Latinos in the room are willing to admit to the anti-blackness that exists in the Latino community? Yes. And then finally, my work talks about all of it, but with an emphasis on the ways that in which black people have been programmed and trained to be anti-black in the ways that we serve white supremacy, and we ascribe and describe and we ascribe others value and worth based on how well they do within Eurocentric structures, white structures and institutions, standards, norms, all of it. And so while we are critiquing white supremacy, we also have to implicate ourselves in it so that we can engage in collective healing as a community. How many of you understand what I'm talking about? Okay. So anti-blackness includes and can be a combination of texturism, dealing with the hair, featureism, dealing with the facial features, colorism, rooted in anti-Afrocentric, pro-Eurocentric desirability and undesirability standards. So, when we get to the formation of the United States of America, the Nationality Acts of 1790 and 1795 constitute that in order to become a citizen of the United States, you must be a free white person. So the value system, one's worth, one's ability to become and gain citizenship and have access to all of the rights and privileges and guarantees that flow through the Constitution, state laws, federal laws, the predicate is that you must be white. And it's all built on a false conception and interpretation of oneself. So what does this mean? So when we talk about, well, what about class? Race is class. Whiteness set the standard for the value system, for one's value, and everything is an extension on that ladder or racial spectrum. All right, I'm going to give you a few minutes to just talk amongst yourselves. What are you taking away from this talk? And I want you to form groups of maybe 3 or 4 and engage in some rich dialogue. I'll give you about 5 minutes. I've got 10 minutes. Okay, so make that 2 minutes. Okay. All right, if you hear my voice, go ahead and clap once. If you hear my voice, clap twice. If you hear my voice, clap 3 times. You can stay in your groups if you want, if it's easier for you. So once the United States, is formed, I just want to share a few. I've got quotes and information about what happens throughout about 30 administrations, taking us from the early 19th century to the beginning of beginning with Washington, and taking us through present day, and talking about many of the racist policies and things like that occurred. I can't do that tonight, but I will share some perspectives, some presidential perspectives with you. So Thomas Jefferson, he says, I advance it therefore as a suspicion only that the blacks, whether originally a distinct race or made distinct by time and circumstances, are inferior to the whites in the endowments both of body and mind. How many of you can see the compulsive preoccupation that I have an idea that we're superior? No one else is occupying themselves with that, but that's where they are deriving their value and worth from. And how many of you see, again, that this is rooted in a form of cognitive distortion, a self-perception that is rooted in an unreality, but a need to gain worth and value as compared to someone else, rather than just having self-esteem on its own. I see someone facing the audience going, whoa! President Abraham Lincoln, he says, I will say then that I am not nor ever have been in favor of bringing about in any way the social and political equality of the white and black races, that I am not nor ever have been in favor of making voters or jurors of Negroes, nor of qualifying them to hold office, nor to intermarry with white people. Okay, I want to stop right here. How many of you are seeing that he is talking about the manufacturing of white status, white privilege, that through the legal process, we can situate white people to be able to vote, to be able to be employed, to participate in our institutions, and we can also situate black people. How many of you see that admission? It's an admission of systemic racism, nor to intermarry with white people. And I will say in addition to this, that there is a physical difference. Turn to your neighbor and say again, compulsive preoccupation. There's a physical difference. There's such a concern. Pathology, psychopathology. So there's a physical difference between the white and black races, which I believe will forever forbid the two races living together on terms of social and political equality. And inasmuch as they cannot so live, while they do remain together, there must be the position of superior and inferior, and I, as much as any other man, am in favor of having the superior position assigned to the white race. Not that we are superior. We've got to assign it to ourselves. And by the way, I'm concerned with it. Turn to your neighbor and say, psychopathological. And I know some of you are finding this, and I don't know, funny, but this is serious, people. This is very serious. Because we've been dealing with this now. We've been dealing with this problem of whiteness as an ideology, as a belief system, as a behavioral system for centuries. And these people need help. No, I'm serious. Like the humanity has been wiped away. The sooner the national authority can be restored, the nearer the Union will be, the Union as it was. If there be those who would not save the Union unless they could at the same time save slavery, I do not agree with them. If there be those who would not save the Union unless they could at the same time destroy slavery, I do not agree with them. My paramount object in this struggle is to save the Union, and is not either to save or to destroy slavery. If I could save the Union without freeing any slave, I would do it. And if I could save it by freeing all the slaves, I would do it. And if I could save it by freeing some and leaving others alone, I would also do that. What I do about slavery and the colored race, I do because I believe it helps to save the Union. And what I forbear because I do not believe it would help to save the Union. Is this saying, oh, I think that black people should be free because this is a immoral institution? Is that what this is saying? No. So stop sanitizing white history. Right? President Andrew Johnson, Lincoln's successor, if blacks were given the right to vote, he's dealing with colorism, featureism, texturism, all of it. That would place every splay-footed, bandy-shanked, humpback, thick-lipped, flat-nosed, woolly-headed, ebon-colored Negro in the country upon an equality with the poor white man. As long as I am president, this will be a country for white men and a government for white men. How many of you are seeing this as a pathological addiction? By show of hands. And I know I keep asking that question. I don't mean to sound like a broken record, but it is so inherent in all of this evidence. And I had to review literally over 50,000 legal examples. And I said, oh my God, this is just, I don't even know how to describe it. And I don't know, I don't even think we have language. You have to face the facts, Nixon said. The whole problem is really the blacks. The key is to devise a system that recognizes this without appearing to. So we've got to legislate their economic deprivation. We've got to legislate them into ghettos. We've got to, right? So the Supreme Court rulings in 1926, Corrigan v. Buckley, which upheld racial restrictive covenants, Euclid v. Ambler, which upheld racial zoning ordinances, zoning ordinances as a practice, right? Because in the 1800s they started saying black people carry different diseases, and because they are an inferior race, we want to make them extinct by the year 2000. So they begin to legislate their racism into academic philosophy, which then they said phrenology, physiognomy, polygenism, eugenics. We've got the scientific proof that these people are inferior. So not only do they need to live separately in ghettos, and if we lock them away in these ghettos and take their access to public health care away, they'll be gone in 100 years. So Madison grants the passing of the Great Race, which was like Bible that Hitler referred to, 1915. And then also Race, Traits, and Tendencies of the American Negro by Dr. Irving Fisher, professor of at Yale, and statistician David Hoffman, 1896. It's all the proof is in there. Manufactured genocide. Turn to your neighbor and say, manufactured genocide. Donald Trump was reported to have said, I think that guy is lazy. And it's probably not his fault because laziness is a trait in blacks. It really is. How many psychological projection? It is. So then you get to the Indian Removal Act. We're going to remove all the Indians, even after we've negotiated the Adams-Onis Treaty that say that they are sovereign to part of the land in Florida, or all of Florida, Mississippi, Georgia, right? They're sovereign, but no, we're going to remove them, right? To provide for an exchange of lands with the Indians residing in any of the states or territories in their removal west of the river Mississippi. It's not a negotiation. Turn to your neighbor and say, racial terrorism. Turn to your neighbor and say, murder. You have the Supreme Court, Rooster v. Georgia. They said, you can't do that. That land is sovereign to the indigenous people. We negotiated a treaty. We said that they are sovereign to it. They can stay there. President Andrew Johnson overlooked it, sent the National Guard down there and had them forcibly removed. Okay? And then you get to, so turn to your neighbor and say, ICE. Okay? So Indian Removal Act, 1830. This is the U.S. Congress, 1850.
Announcements ring out from the pulpits of black churches. But in the early 1850s, not all Bostonians are opposed to slavery, an issue that is increasingly dividing communities, South and North. In Boston, some prominent citizens even host Jefferson Davis, the future president of the Confederacy, on a speaking tour of the city. Many are profiting from the South's slave labor.
No North, no South.
They pack the famed Faneuil Hall to overflowing and repeatedly applaud Davis as he declares that agitation to African slavery, as he refers to it, is destructive to the Union, that the common bond must be maintained.
What is there to sustain this agitation in relation to other people's Negroes?
However, the ties that slaveholders have to wealthy Northerners are not their only source of influence outside the South.
The power of slave owners from the period of the American Revolution to the Civil War was enormous.
Slaveholders control most of the major committees in both houses of Congress. Slaveholders control the Supreme Court. Slaveholders have a vice-like grip on the American economy. Using that power, they're able to protect their human property.
They engineer passage of the Fugitive Slave Law of 1850. Its impact is far-reaching and terrifying. For the first time, any African American simply accused of being a fugitive slave can be pursued and captured, now by federal officials. And federal commissioners are paid $10 for sending an African American back into slavery, but only $5 if they judge them to be free.
And because of the fact that the law required you to participate in the capture and return of fugitives, every person in the country, even in the abolitionist strongholds of the North, were legally bound to be slave catchers.
Stand up, white people. Here we go again. It's not just one colony in 1690. Now, under U.S. law, you're required to be a slave catcher, and you can become rich. You can become rich because you go catch someone, and not even someone who is legally enslaved. The law read that anyone you suspected. Think about how much latitude and jurisdiction that gives you. And it's the same today within our institutions. The treatment of black and brown bodies. And all of the rationales that get created to justify enacting unjust behavior or unjust effects and actions. I really want you to think about this. Not just the history of it, the legacy of it. All right, you can have a seat. And so, I'm about to close, and I'll take a few questions. I saw this the other day. Trump recommended someone to be appointed. I'm going to come back to that video. And this guy that Trump recommended for an appointment, he's going to define whiteness. Okay? This is in front of the U.S. Congress last week.
State Department faced bipartisan pushback yesterday during a confirmation hearing over a previous comments he has made regarding the erasure of white culture. Jeremy Carl served as Deputy Assistant Secretary of the Interior during Trump's first term and is currently a senior fellow at the Claremont Institute, a conservative think tank in Washington. He is Trump's pick for a position that involves implementing U.S. policy at the United Nations and other multilateral organizations. In one exchange, Senator Chris Murphy of Connecticut asked Carl to clarify previous statements regarding concerns over the erasure of white culture and identity.
So tell me the values that stitch together white identity and that make it different than black identity.
Senator, again, thank you for
spent a lot of time talking about this and writing about this.
Yeah, no.
Be able to, you're struggling with this, but you should be fairly easily, I would assume, able to tell us your thoughts on how white identity is different than other kinds of identity and how it's being erased.
Senator, again, thank you for the question. I'm just trying to be very precise. Because I'm here in front of a Senate committee, I would say that the white church is very different than the black church in terms of its tone and style on average. Foodways could often be different. Music could be different.
And those are being erased.
Music could be different. Well, if you look at the Super Bowl halftime show, which was not in English this year.
So our ability to access white churches or white food or white music is being erased?
Senator, again, thank you for the question. What I would say is the biggest thing, because actually, contrary to many of the comments that have been shown, racial nationalists have been very, very critical of my work because they correctly say that I'm actually, of course, not a racial nationalist, which I'm not. I'm a civic nationalist. I am concerned with the majority common American culture that we had for some time that through particularly mass immigration, I think has become much more balkanized, and I think that weakens us. And again, I'm not running away from that comment. I'm not apologizing for it.
Well, I'm way over my time. I think you're struggling to answer this question, right? Because underlying your beliefs is a sentiment that white culture is just simply better. That
Senator, I have to disagree with that.
You haven't been able to really coherently answer any of my questions about how you define white culture, how you define the threat that's posed. I appreciate you being very honest that you believe.
Okay. What percentage of what he started or tried to articulate was rooted in fact? It's all cognitive distortion. And there are ideas that he has, or not even ideas, feelings that he has about whiteness that he can't even put into words. There's no articulation. Turn to your neighbor and say, it's just a feeling. Right? And so this is what we've been dealing with all this time. So I'm going to close with these two videos. One is from 1971, and this features Dr. Alvin Toussaint talking about this. Okay, here we go.
People. Dr. Toussaint? Let me just first say that I think first we have to establish that racism, white racism, is a mental illness. Now, I say that because many white social scientists would like to define racism as something normal in the culture, as a cultural variant. And I think as long as we approach it that way, we really don't deal with the pathology of racism itself. It's like saying that cancer, because a lot of people have in this society, that cancer is somehow normal. But we know that cancer kills, and racism kills and destroys also. And it would be like defining Hitler's slaughter of the Jews as somehow normal. I think we have to face the fact that racism is a mental aberration. And I think underlying white racism is a white paranoia, a fear or a delusion that black people, colored people in the world are somehow going to destroy and hurt the white man. And it's very convenient, I think, for whites to project their impulses, their unacceptable feelings onto blacks, and pretend that they are the wholly good ones and make blacks the victim. So I think that racism is something that doesn't only affect the victim, that is the black man, but also affects the victimizer, the white man, and it's bad for his mental health too, because he doesn't face himself honestly. He pretends that the problem lies outside of himself, so that this society never deals with its violence, its own perversion, its own corruption. They pretend that somehow if you get rid of all the niggers, that everything will be solved, will be much better off. And of course that's not so, but that's a delusion. And it even, I think, carries over into our foreign policy, our attitude toward Asians, our attitude in Vietnam, the massacres, the slaughter, the feeling that we are superior and can, that is we, the white man, not us, can destroy and wipe out other people because we're the chosen people, so to speak. I think that that whites then really don't mature. So
Stunts maturity. How many of you heard delusions, distortions, mental corruption? And so here we are now.
Now leave them alone. This morning, 2 new major American cities now in the crosshairs of President Trump's ongoing crusade against illegal immigration.
Can you put handcuffs on him, please?
The Department of Homeland Security saying raids in New Orleans are targeting people specifically released after arrests for violent crimes like home invasions and armed robberies. In Minneapolis, a senior law enforcement administration official telling NBC News ICE officers are not specifically targeting the city's large Somali population, though on Wednesday, President Trump again taking aim at the group.
And the Somalians should be out of here. They've destroyed our country.
So anyone who looks like me, that's who's ICE is hunting in Minneapolis.
Hunting.
Hunting.
You feel hunted.
We feel hunted.
Minneapolis City Councilman Jamal Osman was born in Somalia. How did it hit you when you heard what the president had to say?
You know, the saddest part for me was just trying to answer my daughters and saying that why are we...
It's interesting too. Many people from non-white groups voted for this administration based on alliances that they have that are rooted in their subscription to certain elements of white supremacy, but also so much of it is rooted in anti-blackness. And the fact that you had a black woman, an Afro-Asian woman, running for the presidency. So it's rooted in misogynoir, sexism, anti-blackness, all of it. Couldn't see it. Would rather accept terrorism. I'm going to close with Dr. Aruna Kilanani.
Would it be fair to say, based on your expertise, that white people are psychopathic?
I think so. Yeah. I mean, I think that there's many lies that, and didn't get to that part because what I delivered was only part of a first series of talks. But the level of lying that white people do that has started since colonialism, we're just used to it. Such as every time that you steal a country, you loot, you say you've discovered something. I mean, this level of lie is actually part of history. We don't say that we killed all these people, we got rid of all the Native Americans. We say we discovered America. You don't talk about the level of death. You don't talk about the level of what actually occurred. You wipe the slate clean, you sanitize the violence, and you actually got lost along the way. You're trying to go to India, and then you say you discovered something. And this level of discovery is everywhere. You've discovered vegetarianism. You know, you've discovered yoga. You've discovered everything is a discovery, and it's all actually stolen.
So, actually, I lied. I'm going to close with Dr. Wright, and then a definition, and then I'll take a few questions. So, Dr. Bobby Wright, in his work around the psychopathic racial personality, he analyzed the behavior of European Americans toward African Americans through the lens of psychopathy. He proposed that the historical and ongoing mistreatment of African Americans by European Americans is not simply a matter of prejudice or ignorance, but is indicative of a deep-seated psychological condition. He argued that the psychopathic racial personality includes an absence of empathy, a disregard for the humanity of others, deceitfulness, and a persistent pattern of exploiting and oppressing African Americans. He believed that these traits are manifested in institutionalized racism, systemic violence, and cultural domination. He says, one of his famous quotes that I included in a lecture and it went viral, in their relationship with the black race, whites are psychopaths, and their behavior represents an underlying biologically transmitted proclivity with roots deep in their evolutionary history. The psychopath is an individual who is constantly in conflict with other persons or groups. He is unable to experience guilt, is completely selfish and callous, and has a total disregard for the rights of others. One of the best methods that can be used to measure the psychopathic traits of the white race is observing and analyzing their universal overt behaviors and attitudes towards blacks. Psychopaths simply ignore the concept of right and wrong. By ignoring this trait in the white race, the lack of ethical or moral development, blacks have made and are still making a tragic mistake in basing the worldwide black liberation movement on moral suasion. It is pathological for blacks to keep attempting to use moral suasion on a people who have no morality, where race is the variable. So in my book, I say the white psychopathy is the behavioral and affective engine, the behavioral and affective engine of white supremacy. It represents the chronic compulsion of white people to assert dominance over black and other non-white peoples as a means of affirming existence. Clinically, white psychopathy functions as a dependency disorder. The white psyche's self-worth depends upon the subjugation of others. Oppression becomes the psychic drug of the dominant class, necessary to sustain the illusion of control and coherence. This psychopathy expresses itself in law, medicine, religion, and education as the rational exercise of authority. Yet beneath these structures lies a shared neurotic core, the inability to experience humanity without hierarchy. The white subject's pleasure principle is rooted in domination. The sight of black suffering reaffirms its sense of being. Thus, white psychopathy is not deviation, but doctrine, the emotional infrastructure of Western civilization. Thank you all. Thank you. Question. Thank you. Questions, thoughts? We have a few minutes. Okay.
Can psychopathy be treated or cured?
She would ask me that question. Really, in the clinical frameworks that do exist within the infrastructure of behavioral health sciences, there is no treatment for psychopathy. Yeah. Who else? Let me say this. In the last chapter of my book, Where Do We Go From Here? I have designed a treatment plan, but it involves people willing to face themselves, their history, remorse, re-engaging and relearning empathy, right? Because what this history tells me is that it was there. It existed. But European people were under such forms of terrorism and being targeted that they had to just conform to inhumanity. There really wasn't a choice. And in my longer courses, I do spend a lot of time there because it's very clear to me that European people, as they're escaping with black people, trying to run away, marry black people, they're being attacked. You'll serve the black person's master if you run away with them. All sorts of things are happening. So yeah, it can. I don't want to say that there's no hope, but there has to be monumental action and commitment through process and over time. Yeah. Anyone else? Who else? Maybe two more. And they don't have to be questions. They can just be reflections. What are you walking away with?
As well, I don't think this disease. I think we're ground zero for this psychopathy, but it feels like we've spread it. We have not contained this cancer. It's around the world. So I want to be more hopeful. Maybe it's one by one.
And I want to say this because when I talk about, so every area of people, activity that I listed under Dr. Cresswell's conceptual framework, I engage every area. So for example, when we think about what's going on with the Epstein files right now, so in the year 1275 in Westminster, the English legislature passed a law that it was legal to marry young girls as early as 12 years old. Okay? So you've got pedophilic culture that's being developed. And that law extends itself into the formation of the United States. And so when the United States forms, you've got laws where the legislatures are lowering the age to age 10 for young girls. So you have a history of almost 700 years of white men being able, because in states in Delaware, it was as early as 7 years old, 6 years old. So again, these things are not only historic in nature, they're cultural. And so when I begin to engage that, and then I begin to see how they started to say that the rape of young black girls, children, and black women were not considered illegal because they weren't rapeable, because young black girls and women were just promiscuous. I said, wow, these are sociopaths. And you can draw no other conclusion to a 50-year-old man engaging with a 6 or 7, 8-year-old girl. That is sociopathic behavior by white behavioral science standards, diagnostic standards. Okay.
Dante, could you explain or talk about the toll that this work has done for you, on you? Because this is something important that people, I think the audience has to understand.
Yeah. Thank you, B. I rarely go here because it's a lot. It's been a lot. It's not just the toll of doing this work. It was the psychic toll of matching my lived experience with all of this information that was giving me context for what I had gone through, what my parents had endured, my grandparents, great-grandparents. I began to see everything very fully. And navigating institutions where I've been discriminated against, I've been mistreated, I've always, in every job that I've had, outperformed white people. And yet, no one ever told me that when I reach a certain status, that I would begin to be undermined out of jealousy, out of deceit. I was told, go to school, get an education, all will be well. That is not the case, because there's envy that begins to emerge. And you can't be too confident, because I've had the term leveraged upon me, uppity Negro. He thinks he's uppity. If you don't, possess confidence, if you don't go to school, if you don't do the things that white society tells you to do, then you're either lazy, you didn't work hard, you didn't pull yourself up. But when you do those things, it works against you as well. And so it led me to the point of wanting to commit suicide. And so I still struggle with that today, and I don't want to cry. It's been a journey. And seeing my mom come home in the 80s and 90s and agonize about how she was being undermined, and, and my dad telling me they wouldn't hire us in the 1960s when I became of age, so I had to go out and start robbing people. It's overwhelming. It's overwhelming. So, thank you.
Thank you so much for doing this work. Thank you for being here still, Dante. And thank you for presenting this as part of your life's mission. I'm not sure if that's what it is, but thank you so much for the work that it takes to do this and to bring this to this type of a forum. And your format in encouraging us to discuss things is so critical. I have not been in a space where such truth has been laid out and we have been able to talk as people as spirits wearing masks of color about the experiences that we've had and about our history. And so thank you so much for bringing these conversations to us.
Thank you. Thank you all. B, I'm going to get you, okay? I'm going to get you. As soon as I pack up, I'm coming to get you. Oh, and if you bought a book online, let me know. I'll give you a bookmark. Why do I forget the names of these things? That's because I'll be 50. I'm aging.